everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and my partner in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith, and our special guest partner tonight, owner of the Old Park Hotel, our favorite geek and aviation fanatic. If I can get that out, I practiced that so many times, and then I still screwed it up. Mr. Chad Wandell is with us tonight. Hi, you guys.
Hey, everybody. How y'all doing?
I'm
pretty
ready for
good.
this. Yeah, this is one that actually the idea of doing this episode came whenever Chad and I were driving up to Iowa, Kansas, to the sleeper mortuary, and I just happened to ask him, "Have you ever heard of the curse of Flight 199?" And he said, "Well, I know about some of the planes that have crashed." And I said, "Oh no, there's a whole curse about it." And so Chad got to look, and he was like, "Holy cow, this would be a great episode." So now that we're doing the episode,
Thanks, Chad.
we drug
Welcome.
him on to participate. That's right. You got on your airplane shirt
And my airplane headset.
and your airplane headset. I see that. So,
We're ready.
what do you guys know about the curse of Flight 191?
The only thing that I know is the one flight Delta 191 happened in like the 70s or 80s, something like that, and I don't even know that much about it.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting flight. I know about a lot of these, and I know a couple of tidbits that most people don't know because they're not privy to some behind the scenes FAA stuff. So we'll see how good Shelley did tonight.
No.
But yeah, so lots of incredible things, tragic all around, but there's a lot of incredible things that came out of a lot of this. So I can't wait to hear what Shelley's got for us because it's airplanes and I'm a nerd. Let's do it.
Well, I promise you that since I am not an airplane nerd, I made this as easy to understand as possible. We're going to let Chad explain some of the things that I couldn't clarify. So that'll be your task for the evening, Mr. Wandell.
Got it.
All right. So if you guys are ready, we're going to jump into the curse of Flight 191.
Let's do it.
All right. So we think of superstitions as old school styles of thought, ideas that have been ingrained in our core knowledge from the time we're little, but that we rationally have no real foundational reason to believe. Yet we avoid black cats, we don't walk under ladders, and try not to break mirrors lest we be stricken with 7 years of bad luck. And then there are numbers that we pass by every day without a second thought. Numbers on clocks, street signs, grocery receipts, and calendars. And most go unnoticed and unremembered. But some numbers... Oh, we got the wrong picture up there, Blake.
Oh, I apologize. That's the one
That's
you labeled
okay.
as number 1.
That's like number 20-something. That's okay. But there are some numbers and dates that are considered unlucky, like Friday the 13th. Now, in Italy, it's Friday the 17th. India is cautious of August the 8th. And the US and the UK both beware the Ides of March. China and Japan avoid the number 4 because it sounds very similar to the way they pronounce the word for death. But Japan also avoids the number 9, which sounds phonetically similar to their word for suffering and agony. Many high-rise buildings don't have a floor 13. And in Eastern Asia, you won't find a floor number 4. But what if this danger isn't superstition? What if a specific sequence or combination of numbers continues to appear in tragedies? Would that be considered a coincidence or perhaps a pattern? Or would we go so far as to call it a curse? It's a number that seems to be associated with tragedy and with a pattern that feels almost intentional. And that number is Flight 191. Now, on the evening of March 5th, 1963, Aeroflot Flight 191 was making what should have been a routine journey across the Soviet Union. The aircraft was an Ilyushin 1118V, one of the Soviet Union's premier long-range turboprop airliners of the era. And on board were 43 passengers and 11 crew members. The flight departed Moscow with no issues. The plane's scheduled stop in Krasnovodsk, the city on eastern shore of the Caspian Sea, had been without incident. And the final leg of the trip was across the desert to the Sea of Ashgabat. There seemed no reason for alarm. The weather forecast provided for the crew suggested the conditions in Ashgabat would be manageable. Clouds were expected, but visibility was acceptable. The forecasters did predict that a dust storm could develop later in the evening, but the flight would arrive well before the worst weather moved in. Confident in their information, the crew began the flight checks and pushed away from the gate. But the weather had other plans. While Flight 191 was still on the ground in Krasnovodsk, conditions began to deteriorate in Ashgabat much more rapidly than expected. The winds had strengthened and dust filled the air. The visibility around Ashgabat was dropping. Updated weather information was issued as Flight 191 lifted off into the evening sky. But there was a critical breakdown in communication. The new forecast was never relayed to the crew. And not long after the departure, the aircraft encountered heavy turbulence. The pilots altered their course slightly in an attempt to avoid the increasingly angry winds that battered the plane as they continued on their way to Ashgabat. And as darkness enveloped the plane, no one aboard knew just how dire their situation had become. Air traffic controllers received reports that the visibility in Ashgabat, due to the dust storm, had fallen to 300 meters. Now, for those of you who don't know the conversions, I did them. That's less than 0.18 of a mile or 984 feet. Just for reference, there's 5,280 feet in a mile.
Okay.
Now, they tried in vain to get the information to Flight 191, but the powerful atmospheric conditions disrupted radio communications, and the message was either not heard or not understood by the crew. But even more critically, after the message was sent, there was no follow-up communication to ensure that the pilots knew how severe the weather had become. By that time, the aircraft approached Ashgabat. The storm was now in full force. Dirt and dust filled the air. Visibility was collapsing. The navigational equipment began to behave erratically. Radio communications were useless due to the signal interference from the weather. The crew was fighting the weather and the plane. Still, they made the decision to land. The aircraft maneuvered into the approach pattern. The pilots worked through multiple turns to line up with the runway. Miraculously, they reported seeing the runway lights in the murky distance and blowing dust. The airport was finally within reach, and as the aircraft descended, the landing lights were switched on. But the brightness of the beams reflected off countless dust particles suspended in the air, and instead of improving the visibility, it created an illuminated wall of dirt directly in front of the aircraft. Suddenly, the plane entered extremely violent conditions. Strong wind gusts slammed into the 1118. Visibility dropped to less than 100 feet, and the aircraft rocked violently from side to side. The pilots fought for control of the plane. The runway was close, but they could barely see it. And then came the first impact. One landing gear struck a runway light as another part of the plane hit a telegraph pole. Flight 199 was descending uncontrollably. Seconds later, concrete light supports shattered beneath the aircraft and the runway perimeter fence was torn apart. Yes.
You said 199. I just wanted to make
I'm
sure.
sorry,
The correction was
191.
191.
I apologize. 191.
okay.
Yes. Thank you for the correction.
Mm-hmm.
So the plane, now badly damaged, was impossible to save. And it crashed less than a mile from the runway. And the impact was devastating. Both wings were torn off. The cockpit was destroyed, and a fire ignited and swept through the middle of the section of the fuselage. Even though rescue efforts were immediate, 8 crew members and 4 passengers perished. 42 others survived. So this is the very first incident of a flight 191 crashing.
Wow. Yeah, I can attest to how crappy it gets. You know, you could be in the clouds and your visibility is pretty good, but the minute you click on your lights, it's just boom, and it's It's like turning on that electric frosted glass. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just want to say before we get too much further into this, Shelley, unfortunately, I think that the numbers on the pictures that came across were out of order.
Okay.
So I will do my best to get the pictures up that
Okay.
correlate to what you're talking about.
If you go back to my original emails, they are numbered. You might be able to catch up there because we're going to be starting with picture number 4, so we're not too far behind.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be doing my best to get
Okay.
you the pictures that I have.
And you know,
Okay.
Shelley, it sounds like this flight mistook a highway for the runway. That's why they came down so early.
No, they actually were in the correct area.
Were
They
they?
were in the yes, they were. They were in the correct area.
Gotcha. So they
They
had
just
something
missed
really
the
pushing.
runway by less than a mile because of all the dirt and everything that was
Yeah.
in the air.
Man, that sucks.
Well, 4 years later, another flight 191 would experience disaster. November 15th, 1967, Major Michael J. Adams, a U.S. Air Force test pilot, sat in the seat of the X-15 Flight 191 experimental spaceplane. It was a missile-shaped craft with an unusual wedge-shaped vertical tail and thin, shabby wings. It was thin, stubby wings. My bad. It was powered by the XLR-99 rocket engine. It was pilot-controlled and capable of 57,000 pounds of thrust. The plane would be carried by a NASA B-52 to 45,000 feet and dropped. The rocket plane would ignite the engines and have enough fuel to reach the high speeds and altitude test points. The rocket engine would provide thrust for the first 80 to 120 seconds of flight, and the remainder of the 10 to 11-minute flight was powerless, and the pilot would descend with a 200-mile-per-hour glide landing. Now, as the B-52 climbed to the designated altitude, Major Adams ran through his final checklist, and everything appeared to be normal. All systems go. So over Del Mar Lake, Nevada, the B-52 released the plane and the rocket engine roared to life. It quickly reached a speed of Mach 5.2 and a peak altitude of 266,000 feet, roughly 50.4 miles above the Earth. But without warning, during the climb, an electrical disturbance degraded the aircraft's controllability. Adams radioed that the X-15 seems squirrely. And then he said, "I'm in a spin." The plane had yawed and went into a spin at Mach 5. Adams fought the plane, and through some combination of pilot technique and aerodynamic stability, he recovered from the spin. But his relief was only momentary. The plane entered into an inverted dive at Mach 4.7. And as the X-15 plummeted into the increasingly thicker atmosphere, the Honeywell Adaptive Flight Control System caused the plane to violently oscillate. 65,000 feet above the Earth, as the pitching motion increased, aerodynamic forces ripped the aircraft into several large pieces. Major Michael Adams was killed when the forward fuselage crashed into the desert floor.
Good God.
Now,
Yeah.
because, yeah,
That's fast. And for
That's
people that don't
fast.
know, Mach 5.2 is 3,100 miles an hour.
Holy shit. Yeah, see, I didn't know that. Like, that
That's
puts it into
fast.
perspective a bit.
Wow.
because his flight had exceeded 50 miles, he was posthumously awarded Air Force astronaut wings, because once you go above the 50-mile mark above the Earth, you are technically considered in outer space. The X-15 program flew a total of 199 flights. Major Michael Adams was the only fatality of the program, and the only flight to claim a life was 191.
Okay.
That's crazy. I mean, that hits home for me because for those of you that don't know, my grandfather died as a test pilot for the United States Air Force. So, holy crap, that's crazy.
Now, 4 years and almost 7 months later, Another incident on a flight numbered 191 would occur. On the evening of June 24th, 1972, a small regional airliner prepared for a routine flight across Puerto Rico. The flight was operated by Prin Air, which is Puerto Rico International Airlines. The carrier connected communities across the island at a time when regional air travel was becoming increasingly more important. The plane was a de Havilland DH-114, Heron. Now I got all that. That's a plane name. It's really long. Um, it
I
was a
showed this one
four.
earlier, but
Okay,
this
there we go.
picture
This is the
belongs
one
to
that
me.
matches. Correct. A
Sorry.
four-engine propeller-driven aircraft that was a familiar sight in the Caribbean skies, and the flight number was 191. That night, the plane carried 18 passengers and 2 crew members from Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport in San Juan to Mercedita Airport in Ponce on Puerto Rico's southern coast. The captain was 28-year-old Donald Price. Yes, he was young, but he was highly experienced with thousands of flight hours. First Officer Gary Bellozu sat next to him. He was younger and less experienced, but he was qualified for the flight. And as the passengers settled in, they had no way of knowing they were about to become part of one of Puerto Rico's most puzzling aviation accidents. Prinair Flight 191 departed at 8:52 p.m. The plane climbed into the warm Caribbean night and headed southwest across the island. Flight time was expected to take roughly 35 minutes. Now, the weather wasn't perfect, but it wasn't extraordinary either. Pilots flying around Puerto Rico were accustomed to changing conditions like coastal fog and shifting visibility. And the flight progressed normally as the lights of the towns and highways passed below in the darkness. But as the flight approached Ponce, the crew faced an unusual situation. It was late. So late that the control tower at Mercedita Airport had already closed for the evening. Now, in these circumstances, pilots are responsible for coordinating their own landing using standard procedures rather than receiving direct instructions from air traffic controllers. And that's much like what small planes do, correct, Chad? Whenever you go into smaller
That's correct. You've
airfields?
actually flown with me when we've done this exact
Yes.
procedure, right? You call out your distance markers and you set up for, your entry into what's called the pattern, and you establish yourself in the pattern to do your landing. So yeah, this is
So,
standard procedure.
so this is what these pilots are having to do. Now, a fog had rolled in and had blanketed the airport, but the runway lights were still visible. So the crew prepared for landing. And then they saw something that shouldn't have been there. And for decades afterwards, investigators would debate exactly what it was. As the plane descended towards the runway, witnesses reported seeing what appeared to be lights on the airport grounds. Some believed that it was a vehicle on the runway. Others disagreed, but inside the cockpit, whatever the pilot saw, caused them immediate concern, and it was serious enough for them to abort the landing. The aircraft had nearly touched down on the runway when the crew initiated a go-around. Now, a go-around is a maneuver in which pilots abandon the landing and climb away to make another landing attempt. And go-arounds are very common in aviation and are usually completed safely. But timing is everything. Flight 191 was already low and slow and committed to the landing when the decision was made. The captain advanced the power and the engines responded, and the aircraft began to climb away from the runway. But during the maneuver, the aircraft became over-rotated. So to break it down, the nose was raised too high while the plane was still traveling much too slowly. An airplane generates lift through airspeed, and if the nose is raised too aggressively without enough airspeed, the wings can no longer support the aircraft. And the result is an engine stall. And a stall close to the ground is one of the most dangerous situations that a pilot can face. And any pilot will confirm to you that in an emergency situation, you need 3 things: altitude, airspace, and an idea. Airspeed and an idea. Is that correct, Chad? Altitude, airspeed, and an idea?
100%. And we actually practice this maneuver, this exact scenario, as part of our training. We actually get the airplane slow, set up for landing, and intentionally stall it. But we don't ever do it near the ground because until you get really good at it, it takes about 1,000 feet to recover. And does anybody want to take a guess on what the pattern altitude is to land?
I do not know.
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet.
So if you have this happen, you have literally the average reaction time to hit the ground.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, again, the pilots needed three things: altitude, airspeed, and an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the pilots had none of those things. The plane lost the airflow it needed. The aircraft stalled, and there was almost no altitude for recovery. The passengers on board likely felt the change immediately. The sensation of climbing suddenly being replaced by a loss of stability and the feeling of falling. Moments later, Flight 191 crashed. The aircraft broke apart near Mercedita Airport. Both pilots were killed and 3 passengers lost their lives. 15 passengers did survive. Now, in the months that followed, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, which is what I'm going to call them from now on because I get tongue-tied, they examined the witness statements, the airport records, and the physical evidence at the crash site. The initial conclusion seemed straightforward. The NTSB determined that the crew had seen an unauthorized vehicle on the runway and attempted a go-around to avoid a collision. The sudden maneuver had led to an over-rotation and subsequent stall. Witnesses had reported lights at the runway, and there were suggestions that a Puerto Rico Ports Authority vehicle might have been involved. Case closed. But 3 years later, new information emerged. Evidence suggested that the person believed to have been driving the suspected vehicle had actually departed the airport more than 15 minutes before the crash occurred. The NTSB did something unusual. They reopened the investigation. And after reviewing the evidence again, investigators concluded that there was no reliable evidence that there was a vehicle ever on that runway. And the original explanation was withdrawn. Now, the official findings were amended, and the probable cause was revised. And the most important question in the case still remains unanswered. Why did the crew go around? And for more than 50 years, the answer has been debated. Did the pilots see lights and mistake them for a vehicle? Did the fog distort their perception? Did they see something that left no trace of evidence? Or could it be something that we have yet to discover? The only 2 people that know for sure what happened did not survive Flight 191.
That's crazy. So we had an aviation incident very similar to this just recently when a man he climbed the fence at an international airport. Was it Denver? And he ran onto the runway and the airplane struck him. So sometimes you don't see it till it's last minute, but it's one of those things. We are drilled in full throttle, get your speed up, get out. And he kind of did the get out. There had to have been something to make him pull back that violently to cause an engine stall, because those airplanes are designed to fly on one engine. And so with both engines at full throttle, his ass should have been out of there.
Up and out, right.
Yeah.
But he was too low.
Damn.
So anybody starting to think that there's a pattern here?
That's weird. This one's weird because all the numbers say they should have been okay. Like the power ratio to that airplane should have been okay. They're built to get the hell out of a bad situation, and he didn't. Something's not right.
I agree.
I'm starting to develop something. I don't know necessarily if it's what everybody thinks it's going to be.
Okay.
So
the
wheels are turning.
Okay. Well, then let's continue.
I'll say that. Okay.
Now, on May 15th, 1979, David Booth had a nightmare. It was an intensely vivid dream. He saw a massive plane with the word American written on the side. And in the dream, the plane rolled on its side and exploded. He knew it was happening somewhere in the Midwest, and that the crash happened shortly after takeoff. Initially, he shook it off and went back to sleep, but he had the dream again and again. And he was so shaken by the dream that he started making calls. He called American Airlines. He called the Federal Aviation Administration. He called because he felt like he had to warn them. I mean, you can imagine the reaction. A guy calls talking about a bad dream. Now, most would have just dismissed him outright and hung up. But something in Booth's voice, the sheer desperation, made them listen. And they took his details. But the problem was that his premonition or vision, it was just of chaos, not a detailed flight plan, not a flight number, and not a date. It was just this awful sinking feeling of impending doom. And for 10 consecutive nights, this dream plagued his rest. On May 25th of 1979 was a picture-perfect day. It was the Friday afternoon heading into Memorial Day weekend. Chicago's O'Hare Airport was bustling. The mood was light and families excitedly headed for vacation. Business travelers were eager to get home. And on the tarmac sat a gleaming McDonnell Douglas DC-10, ready for its routine flight from Chicago to Los Angeles. Piloting the plane were Captain Walter Lux and First Officer James Dillard. Both were very experienced on the DC-10, and there was nothing outwardly unusual about the plane. It had flown before, it had been serviced, and it had passed inspection. But on this flight, the passengers, they were in for a treat. There was a new technology on this DC-10. It was a CCTV system that showed the pilot's view from the cockpit, which connected to screens in the passenger's cabin. The passengers would be able to watch their flight live from inside the cockpit for the entirety of the flight.
I'm good, Boo.
They would get to see everything that the pilots saw.
I'm good, Boo. I'm good.
Now, on board were 258 passengers and 13 crew members. A total of 271 souls were preparing for a routine flight to LAX. The passengers took their seat, the flight crew secured the door, and the flight was underway. At 3 p.m., the DC-10 pushed back from the gate. The weather was clear and visibility was good. Captain Lux and First Officer Dillard completed their checklists as the aircraft taxied to runway 32 right. And at 3:02, the plane began its takeoff roll. The acceleration pressed the passengers back into their seats. And when the aircraft hit V1, the pilots lifted the nose of the plane and the main landing gear began to lift from the ground. Now, just so you know, V1 is the speed at which a plane must take off. Takeoffs can be aborted at any speed less than V1. So as the massive jet lifted from the runway, air traffic controllers watched in horror as the giant engine of the left wing ripped away with such a force that it flipped up and over the wing of the plane. Now, inside the cockpit, the pilots heard a loud thump. The thump they heard was the left engine falling off.
Jesus.
They were past V1.
God.
The plane had to become airborne. Now, it should be noted that a single engine failure is not a reason to abort a takeoff. The DC-10 had 3 engines and should have been able to safely go around or even continue their flight to LAX with the 2 remaining functioning engines. Now, in the cockpit, the pilots scanned their instruments, and they saw that the number 1 engine had failed. They didn't know it had fallen off. So they continued their climb, and as they continued their climb, their instrument panels lost power and failed. They were flying blind. And they also didn't know that when the engine came off, it severed hydraulic lines, causing the wing's leading edge slats on the left to retract.
Ooh.
Now, the slats are what give the plane the lift at low speeds. And with one side retracted and the other extended, the plane was now dangerously unbalanced. It was aerodynamically a nightmare. The plane only got to 325 feet above the ground.
Mm.
And as the pilots fought for control of the plane, for a brief moment, it seemed possible that the crew might save it. And then the left wing began to drop. People on the ground recalled an eerie silence as they watched the impossible unfold. A fully loaded airliner was banking far beyond anything they had seen. Within seconds, the left wing was nearly vertical. The nose dipped, and the aircraft entered an unrecoverable roll. And for 50 agonizing seconds, the pilots battled a machine that was already dead. The DC 10 rolled past 90 degrees, its nose pointed directly at the ground, and it plummeted into a field near a trailer park just a mile from the end of the runway. The jet, fully loaded with fuel, exploded into a colossal fireball that could be seen for miles.
That's nuts.
Black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air. Debris and human carnage were scattered across the field. All 271 souls were lost. 2 people on the ground were also killed by debris, bringing the total lives lost to 273. News spread across the city within minutes. Television stations interrupted programming to report the crash. Emergency vehicles flooded the area, and families gathered around telephones waiting desperately for information. At O'Hare, airline employees were faced with the heartbreaking task of confirming that there were no survivors. I don't know why this is getting me up so upset. Now, when David Booth saw the reports, he became physically sick. He was seeing on television what he had envisioned in his nightmares. Now, the FAA and the NTSB investigators questioned him extensively. They weren't treating him as a suspect, but as a genuine anomaly, as a man who seemingly saw the future. And when he went to bed the night of the crash, the dream that had troubled his mind for 10 nights did not return. Now, in the weeks that followed, investigators from the NTSB combed the wreckage, trying to determine the cause of the crash. Many people assumed that there had been some catastrophic mechanical failure inside the engine. But the truth was far more mundane. It wasn't a freak act of God. It was human error driven by the desire to save time and money. The NTSB discovered that American Airlines had been using non-approved maintenance procedures to save time on their engine service. Instead of removing the engine from the pylon, which is the strut that connected it to the wing, as manufacturer McDonnell Douglas specified, the mechanics were using a forklift to remove the entire engine and pylon assembly as a single unit.
The hell?
Wow.
Right. You're talking about something that moves in inches to reline up something that is microfractions.
Yeah.
The shortcut put immense stress on the pylon's near attachment point that created tiny stress fractures that went unnoticed until the pylon bolt holding the engine on snapped. Over time, with each flight, the crack had grown, and on May 25th, 1979, it finally failed. All the DC-10s were grounded in the United States until they could be checked and proper maintenance procedures performed. And this flight became a turning point in aviation history. But for many people, the story didn't end with the crash or the investigation. Almost immediately after the disaster, strange stories began to circulate around the crash site. Residents living in the trailer park reported hearing knocks on doors and windows late at night. But when they opened the door, no one was there. Dogs barked towards empty fields, and people reported hearing footsteps approaching the trailer and mobile homes before the sounds would suddenly just stop. Motorists reported seeing mysterious white lights moving through the field where Flight 191 had crashed. Now, these stories made the local police uneasy, and officers responded repeatedly, assuming they would find trespassers or morbid curiosity seekers or even relic hunters. Instead, they found nothing except an empty, silent field. Residents of the trailer park, that included firefighters and police officers, reported encountering confused figures late at night. Some of the reports detailed answering a knock at the door and finding a person standing outside who seemed disoriented. And the stranger would reportedly say things like, "I need to get my luggage," or "I have to make my connection." And then they would vanish. One more famous account is from a man who was walking his dog near the crash site. He claimed that a young man approached him asking where he could find a telephone. The stranger appeared disheveled and smelled strongly of fuel and appeared to have steam or smoke rising from his body. The dog walker turned to point in the direction of the nearest phone, and when he turned back, the man was gone. To date, American Flight 191 is the deadliest single-plane airline disaster on American soil. And in the aftermath, a pattern was noticed. Passengers noticed, pilots whispered, and a story began to form. Flight 191 was unlucky, but we all know that patterns don't become obvious immediately. They build. And 6 years later, the same number would appear again. Different airline, different aircraft, different city, but the same number, 191. And with it came disaster once more. Now, the afternoon of August 2nd, 1985 began like many of the countless summer days in Texas. It was hot. So hot that the air around DFW International Airport shimmered with heat waves rising up from the pavement. Now, there had been a chance of thunderstorms forecasted throughout the region, but that wasn't unusual. North Texas in August often produced towering clouds that built rapidly during the afternoon before unleashing heavy rain and lightning. And for airline crews, it was just another day of navigating the skies in Texas summer weather.
Yep.
At Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, Delta Airlines Flight 191 was preparing for a cross-country route from Florida to Los Angeles with a quick stop in Dallas. The Lockheed L-1011 TriStar was captained by Edward N. Ted Connors, and his first officer was Rudolph R. Rudy Price. Both pilots were Navy veterans with more than 36,000 flight hours between them. Captain Connors was known as a meticulous pilot who adhered strictly to company policies and was overly cautious when flying. He would request to be rerouted if weather conditions on his flight path were uncertain. He would fly around storms even if they were small and manageable. He took no risks with his planes or the passengers within. Now, the Lockheed 1011 TriStar, it was one of the most advanced wide-body airliners of its era, large and sophisticated and considered highly reliable. The TriStar represented the modern age of aviation. 152 passengers and 11 crew members settled in for the long flight, and the flight departed without incident. And as the aircraft headed across the Gulf Coast towards Texas, the pilots received a weather update. Thunderstorms were forming around Dallas-Fort Worth. This wasn't surprising. So the crew monitored the weather radar and received updates from air traffic controllers. The storms, by all accounts, seemed manageable. As Flight 191 approached Dallas in the late afternoon, the airport was busy. A steady, continuous flow of aircraft were landing and departing. Air traffic controllers call it slinging 10. And when done correctly, the movement is seamless. The motion is fluid and effortless, like a symphony playing in the skies.
Mm-hmm.
The ATC were aware of the approach of Flight 191. The storm that the pilots had been made aware of had formed near the airport's approach path. And from a distance, it didn't look extraordinary. Just the normal dark clouds and some heavy rain and some lightning scattered in. All things that the experienced crew had dealt with before. Now at 6 p.m., Flight 191 began its final approach into DFW Airport. The crew could see the rain ahead and the flickering of lightning. Raindrops streaked across the windows, and the plane encountered some turbulence. The airport was close. It was just a few minutes and they would be on the ground. And in the cockpit, the pilots discussed the weather calmly and carefully monitored the approach. As the TriStar descended through 15,000 feet, 1,500 feet, the aircraft entered the storm. The rain intensified immediately and visibility dropped. The windshield became a curtain of water. Now the passengers could only see darkness, despite it being a late summer afternoon. And then the microburst struck. A microburst is a sudden, powerful column of sinking air that slams into the ground and spreads outward with violent force.
Mm-hmm.
First came the headwind that slowed the plane down.
This is
Then
really
came
dangerous.
Then came the invisible explosion of air, a severe downdraft that pushed the aircraft towards the ground faster than it could climb. The pilots responded with more power, but before the aircraft could recover, the final stage arrived, a powerful tailwind that pushed the aircraft forward. The airspeed collapsed and the plane was losing lift. The crew fought desperately, and every measure was taken. The engines were at maximum thrust and the nose was raised, but physics were moving faster than the plane could respond. Flight 191 was going down. Below the aircraft was Highway 114. Motorists below were unaware of the chaos just overhead. Then Flight 191 dropped out of the clouds. The plane hit the ground just short of the runway and bounced back up into the air. It crossed Highway 114, striking a car and killing the driver instantly. The plane bounced back into the air, clipping airport property before it crashed into water tanks on the airport's perimeter and exploded. The plane split apart. The tail section spun off and ended up in the grass next to the runway. Oh, that's calm air. The entire forward section of the plane, from row 34 to the nose, was destroyed. Fire towered skyward and black smoke billowed over the airport. DFW emergency crews raced to the crash site. Of the 163 people aboard, only 27 survived. 136 died in the crash, and the plane had also claimed the life of a motorist on Highway 114.
Damn.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, this was an intense one. We this is one we study because they did everything right, but they did everything wrong. But it's
And
weird.
I remember seeing this one on the news. This is one that I vividly remember. The NTSB investigators quickly focused on the weather. They launched an extensive investigation involving meteorologists, engineers, pilots, and aviation experts. And what they discovered changed aviation history. The aircraft had been hit by a microburst, and little was known about the phenomena until that point. Microbursts create wind conditions so severe that even modern airliners struggle to overcome them. The investigation also revealed that the crew had few tools available to detect those dangers in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So this tragedy became a turning point. Researchers accelerated work on Doppler weather radar. Airports installed advanced wind shear detection systems, and pilot training programs were redesigned to teach crews how to recognize and escape microburst conditions. The flight was yet another numbered 191 that ended in tragedy. Now, after 1985, the idea of a curse was in full swing. People were changing their flights if they were assigned to 191. It seemed that no one really wanted to tempt fate. But for 20 years, there were no incidents on flights number 191 until the morning of August 27th, 2006. Most of Lexington, Kentucky was still asleep. The sun had not yet risen, and the street lights cast pools of light on the quiet roads. At the Bluegrass Airport, the day had already begun. Ground crews moved about their routines, terminal employees were greeting passengers, and a small regional jet sat waiting to depart for a flight that should last about 2 hours. The airplane was a Bombardier CRJ 100 Region jet. It carried 47 passengers and 3 crew members to their next destination. It was simply the first leg of an ordinary Sunday journey. It was Comair Flight 5191. It was operating as a Delta connection flight, so a 5 was assigned in front of the flight number 191. In the cockpit was Captain Jeffrey Clay and First Officer James Polhickey. The crew had completed their pre-flight checklist and were ready to depart. As the plane pushed back from the gate just minutes before dawn, and Comair Flight 5191 cleared for takeoff on
I
runway
apologize,
22.
Shelley.
That's okay.
I have pictures. They're not lining up.
Okay, that's all right. So they were cleared for takeoff on runway 22. Now the airport only had 2 runways. Runway 22 was longer, with 7,000 feet of length, which was more than enough for the regional jet to take off. And the second runway was runway 26, with only 3,500 feet, and it was used mainly for general aviation and private planes. But somewhere during the taxi, something went wrong. Not mechanically, humanly. The plane lined up for takeoff on runway 26, which was far too short for a fully loaded CRJ 100 to safely depart. And neither pilot recognized the error. There was no warning from air traffic control. And the jet rolled on to the wrong runway and advanced the throttles. Comair Flight 191 began its takeoff roll, and the plane roared down the asphalt. Suddenly, just so you can know, that blue line, that's the runway they should have been on. The red line, that's actually the runway that they were on. So
I am shocked Tower didn't immediately catch that, because that's their whole job till that airplane takes off. Like they go, cleared for takeoff, and you repeat it back, and it's big fucking numbers on the runway. Like you can't not get it. Like that's a huge human error.
These are the gentlemen flying the plane. I do apologize. I missed that picture.
Yes. Well, finally, the pilot noticed that something wasn't right. They were running out of runway fast, and the aircraft wasn't accelerating the way they expected, and the available pavement was disappearing. The captain attempted to rotate the plane into the air, and for a brief moment, the jet lifted, but it couldn't climb.
Stall.
The plane hit the perimeter fence and smashed through the trees beyond the airport boundary. It came to rest in a wooded area and burst into flames. 49 of the 50 people on board were killed. The lone survivor was First Officer James Polhickey. Flight 191 had struck again. Now, not every Flight 191 incident ended in a crash. But what happened doesn't make it any less disturbing. 6 years later, on March 27th, 2012, passengers boarded a JetBlue Flight 191 from New York to Las Vegas. 3 hours into the flight, Captain Clay Osborne, a 49-year-old veteran pilot, began to behave erratically. First Officer Jason Dowd noticed the behavior. "We need to take a leap of faith," Captain Osborne said to First Officer. His voice was deadly serious. "We're not going to Vegas, and I can't be held responsible if this plane crashes." Now the captain's behavior escalated rapidly. He started ranting about Jesus, Al-Qaeda, 9/11, and sin. He was sweating, his breath was ragged. He turned off the radios and dimmed the cockpit monitors almost as if he was trying to turn off the outside world. And suddenly he bolted from his seat and ran into the passenger cabin, screaming incoherently. Passengers watched in shock as their captain yelled about a bomb being on board the plane. First Officer Jason Dowd seized his chance. He locked the cockpit door, taking sole control of the airplane. Now in the cabin, chaos ensued. The captain was in a full-blown rampage. An off-duty police officer was on board and tackled the out-of-control man. And it took several passengers to restrain and subdue the captain. First Officer Dowd radioed that he would need to make an emergency landing, and the plane was diverted to Amarillo, Texas. There was also another JetBlue pilot on board the aircraft, and once Captain Osmond was under control, the pilot joined Dowd in the cockpit and assisted in a safe landing in Amarillo. No one died, but the curse still left its mark. Osmond was charged with interfering with the flight crew, but the charges were later dropped after he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. His psychologist stated that the brief psychotic disorder was brought on due to exhaustion and a lack of sleep. But for those watching the story unfold, it was just more proof that Flight 191 had struck again. But this time it had not targeted the machine, but the man that flew it.
Jeez.
So
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
Somebody starts yelling shit like that on a plane that I'm on. First thing, I'm gonna make you take a nap.
Yeah. Well, I think that's basically what they did. They subdued him,
Yeah.
they tied him up, they
Well, he'd
held
have
him
never got out
down.
of the cockpit. I'd have just been like
Yeah.
judo chopped to the nose, and he'd have been out. And I'd have been like,
Yeah.
Mayday, mayday, mayday! I need a place to land right the hell now.
Yeah. So, is the curse real? Or does it simply break down to numbers? Modern superstition looks a little different than it did in the past. It hides behind logic and coexists with science. Coders use binary code, which is a sequence of ones and zeros. And according to science, everything can be broken down into numbers. Frequencies, music, atoms, elements, and even air can be reduced to a number. So do the numbers 9 and 1 have anything to do with the repeating tragedies? Numerologists have had a field day with the number 191. Now, numerology is the study of numbers and their energetic influence on our lives. And each number has characteristics and energy, and the way they're combined can influence actions and patterns. In numerology, the number 1 represents beginnings, rebirth, independence, leadership, ego, and sudden forceful change. The number 9 represents completion, endings, loss, finality, and human experience at its fullest. So putting the numbers together in a mirror structure, 191, it looks like an echo pattern, beginning, end, and begin again. So
not to draw a weird, tie there. That's kind of like what a phoenix does, crashes and burns and is reborn from the flames. But
only to crash and burn and be reborn again.
Yep.
So you think there's nothing to it? 9/11 has the same numbers, different arrangement, but still a tragic day in history. And on September the 11th, there were 19 terrorists that hijacked planes. Our emergency system, we call 911 for help when something bad has happened. The siege at Waco occurred on April the 19th. Hurricane Camille made landfall on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, causing catastrophic destruction on August the 19th. So is it a curse or just an odd string of random coincidences? A curse doesn't require something supernatural. It only needs 3 things: a pattern, a story, and people willing to believe it. And Flight 191 has all 3. However, after checking FlightAware, The only U.S. carrier still using flight number 191 is United Airlines and the now defunct Spirit Airlines. Delta, American, and Southwest have all retired the flight number 191. Airliners based in other countries still use the number. So, do you believe? Now, before you answer, imagine yourself taking a last-minute flight and the number is 191. Do you get on the plane? Maybe the number means nothing. Maybe it is just a coincidence. Maybe some patterns don't need to be real to feel real enough to matter. Strange coincidence or supernaturally suspect? You know what? I'll let you decide.
You also had that dude sitting in seat 19, Shelley.
I did.
Don't think I didn't catch that shit.
I did. Yes.
Man. So a little tidbit that you might not know. You brought up 9/11, and there was a flight there that crashed. Do you know what flight number that was? It was the one that hit the field.
Flight 19? 91? 93?
Well,
I can't remember. Damn, there's so many numbers that got thrown
so
around.
It was flight 92, but had American not retired that number, it would have been flight 191.
Fun fact. Sequentially in
Wait, the one that
rotation-
went down in the field?
Right.
That
Yeah.
was flight 93.
Yeah. Okay. So flight
Correct.
93.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get that correct.
Yeah.
That's a very important,
Yeah.
important story. So yes,
So
that's flight 93.
that flight number traditionally until it was retired, that segue was flight 191. So
But-
yeah, it only
But
got
American
changed.
had retired the number, which is not unusual. Airliners after a crash will usually retire if it's a crash that's bad enough, will retire a flight
Mhm.
number. American retired it after their crash at Chicago O'Hare Airport.
Mhm.
So that one was out of commission in 79. They stopped using it. I
Yeah.
believe that's correct. 79. Did I make sure I got that right?
Yes.
Yeah, O'Hare was 79. Okay.
Yeah.
So also, I mean, and there are certain numbers that airliners don't use. 666, they don't use that number. So, 757, because that's a plane number,
Yep.
767, 777, they don't use those
Yep.
numbers. Anything that's a plane number, they don't use those numbers either. And sometimes, if it were up to me, I would say just retire all the flight 191s. Now, some people say, you wait long enough, a pattern's going to emerge with everything. But this is not a long time period. And there
No.
are a lot of flight 191s that have had incidents or have crashed.
Yeah. And if you look at the crash histories, there's no other patterns like this. So if you go look and pull all the crash records on flight numbers and tail numbers, you will not find a pattern that stands out like this. Like it is statistically not like it's too far out of the odds. Like it's too many standard deviations from normal. Yeah.
This many of them, one or two, yes, maybe. But this is in different countries, in the Soviet Union, in Puerto Rico, and of course in the United States. These are all different planes.
Yep.
They're
Different
different
carriers.
airliners. Yeah,
Yep.
different carriers. And the common denominator on all of them is the flight number. It was all different conditions. One was weather, the microburst. Another was someone thought they saw something on the runway. Another one, the engine fell off the plane. They all have different. One of them just they went onto the wrong runway to take off and didn't have enough runway.
Yep.
All different reasons. The only common link is the number 191. So what do you guys think? Curse, coincidence? I'm just making it up. Apopia?
The really interesting thing about that Delta Airlines one that happened at DFW, that crash, while tragic, has saved countless lives. Because a lot of people don't realize that airplane was so advanced. It had some of the best black box recording systems on it, because before they would just record, voices and stuff like that. But this one was actually recording every flight control input, everything that was going on with this. So like it was the first time we had so much data, and they happened to have onboard radar. Really one of the only planes that have that to start with. Like it was brand new technology coming out to be able to have onboard radar. It wasn't great, but they were actually able to capture a microburst on radar because of that and identify its signature in other radar patterns, so they can actually identify it. So that crash allowed us to have data that we would have never otherwise have gotten to see that. And so with that, they were able to change weather and aviation history forever. So tragic thing, but something fantastic came out of it to make everything safer. So, we have to take the good and the bad. And that was one of the things that came out of that. So bless them for all of that. But if you've never heard that black box recording of the audio of that one, that's available to be heard. You can go listen to that crash happen.
I'm good.
So is the American Airlines one, even though there's not much of the audio that's captured, what you hear on that audio, and unfortunately I found it and I listened to it, and there's not much. You hear some little bit of talking, and then you hear this thump, and it's loud. And the last thing that you hear the captain say is, "Damn." And the audio is gone because the hydraulics lines have been severed. And that actually changed the way that hydraulics were installed in airplanes. There's multiple systems routing the hydraulics instead of just one.
Yeah, everything is in a redundancy in an aircraft. And so if it's on the right side, it's on the left side, and the left side can control the right side and the right control the, so like you have two generators, you have two everything, you have two hydraulic systems. So if one fails, you have a backup. Everything is in backup on an airplane, which is why it is so safe. I mean, you hear these stories and you think aviation is dangerous. It's wildly safer than any other form of transportation, because every time there is even the slightest incident, a new rule and a new regulation gets put in place. And it's just to kind of give you a comparison. If we were to apply aviation standards to our cars, every time you had your state inspection every year, they would take your car completely apart and inspect every nut and bolt on it and then put it back together. I had to do that with my own airplane. You literally have to take it apart, have a third party inspect it. You weren't allowed to inspect it yourself. Someone else had to sign off on that. And then that person is actually legally responsible for having inspected that. So if something goes wrong, they can be held legally responsible for that problem. So it's a big deal. And those systems are in place to be safe. And it really does make a difference. Now, another thing that American Airlines flight you were just talking about where they lost the engine, everybody remember the FedEx flight that just crashed like 6 or 7 months ago?
Yep.
Exact same thing. Engine came off, came up, rolled over, and crashed. So it's a tragic thing, but there's video of that one and you can see how it happens. And it should have been a benign incident, but for some reason it wasn't. And I think a lot of that one was they were way overweight. They needed both engines to get up, but that one just was terrible.
I'm having a hard time with this one. I don't know. Because I'm one that usually says I don't believe in coincidences. But I don't know. To me, it's like I believe in math. That's my thing. You know what I mean? It's like, so for
math
me,
don't lie.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that for me is what is the probability of 191 or 19 or 91 or 919 or any of those combinations being in a tail number or flight number for a plane? Looking at the probability of what I just ran on the website, it's anywhere between 1 in 250 and 1 in 600. We have anywhere between 1,000 to 1,200 aircraft crashes, most involving smaller airplanes.
Yep, it's us.
Which happen every year annually. Most of those are smaller airplanes. Given such a low probability of having 191 and a high volume of crashes involving smaller airplanes, which you gave us a good 50-50, I would say, of small and commercial on that. I don't know if I would necessarily say that the flight itself is cursed. I actually think I might fall into the category. It may just be the numbers on this.
Well, here's
in my
a
opinion.
twist to your thought there. All the flights that she mentioned were commercial flights. None of those were general aviation.
Right, but what I'm saying is that they were small planes or larger planes. She gave us a good 50-50 mix,
Right, but
depending on
the majority of plane crashes come from general aviation aircraft, not commercial aircraft. And so if you look at if you take the general aviation numbers out of it, to have that many commercial aircraft crashes on its own is high. And then you throw in the tail number. It's not even a tail number. They're actually assigned flight numbers. The tail number is totally different. So that kind of changes those odds a lot. So it's a number I can definitely go crunch and find out for you, but it'll take some time.
Well, but I mean, is it odd over 60 years though? We're talking from 1963 to 2026. You know, is that odd to have that many? We're talking, how many did you give us? 6, Shelley?
I think there were 6 or 7.
6 total?
6 crashes and 1 incident.
Yeah.
Here,
so,
let me pull FAA records. Let me tell you how
So-
many crashes there were total in that time period. So
Oh, there we go. See, we got our pilot on it. But you have to remember, the odds of a 191 flight crashing reduced every time when Americans crashed, it went out of service. When Deltas crashed, it went out of service. Southwest voluntarily pulled that number.
Mhm.
So United still continues to operate it, and Spirit continued to operate it. JetBlue still operates it.
My question is, when were all these aircrafts manufactured? Were they manufactured around? There's too many components here that I don't think that we could say, like, I don't know. This is hard.
What
for
are the
me
chances
because-
that everyone that's labeled 191 happens to get a bad aircraft or a bad pilot? And for the most part, these were all good pilots. They were pilots with lots of flight hours
Mhm.
that were trained. It wasn't like their first day running around up in the sky.
Mhm.
So in the United States, the number of fatal accidents, anybody want to give a guess for commercial airliners?
In total or per year?
From 1962 to 2006.
Fatal,
500.
had fatalities. 40.
Pretty close. 44.
44. Well, I have no faith in the aviation system in America. I said 500.
And
So
in that time,
you take
six
44 and
of the
6 of them
44.
for flight 191.
No, you can't do that. You can't do that.
Yeah, you
can't do
can't.
that.
Those are
No,
fatal
you can't.
crashes.
No, you can't, because that's the United States. You can't do that. You're talking, you got to take the whole world. We need the whole world's data, because you had in there different
I didn't
countries.
look up incidents for 191 in different countries. These are just the ones with fatalities that
I understand
up.
that, but he just pulled numbers just for the United States. He said,
just for fatalities. Yeah.
do you want to know
Yeah,
how many
just for
commercial airlines in the United States had fatalities? We're looking at United States. The first story you gave us, Soviet Union,
Aeroflot.
We're like, okay, so we're talking, so that's Soviet Union. Okay, there's Major Michael J. Adams. That's U.S. Air Force. There's U.S. Air Force right there. So how many of these were in the United States? How many weren't? We can't say 6 out of the 44 because they all weren't United
5.
States.
All but one of those were.
Print Air, Caribbean. I'll go
Which was
back through
flying
the
from Puerto
script page
Rico.
by page.
It was flying from Puerto Rico.
Okay,
That's
but
US.
Print Air is not a United States company.
Where did Print Air crash?
Airport in Puerto Rico. And she was talking about how the Puerto Rican pilots flew around. This was a smaller aircraft. They were used to this. So that was Puerto Rican.
Mm-hmm. Still US.
Okay.
Soviet Union was Aeroflot. That was the very first one that kicked it off. Then you had Crash in the United States was the test pilot.
I know. But that's what I'm saying. It's like we can't say 6 out of the 44 have 191 because they're not all United States.
But we're only measuring aircrafts that have fatalities.
Right, but if you take Russia out of it, all the rest of them were United States generated based. So that's 5 out of 44.
Okay.
That's still a lot. I still don't like those odds.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not saying they're good odds. I'm just saying that we've got to look as investigators who label something as curse, like to say we got to look at all the info that we have. Like we need to know what's the full probability of a flight number having 191. On top of that, when were each one of these planes manufactured? Who were they manufactured by? What were the quality and testing year to year to year to year on them? One's crashing in 1963. Can we compare that to one crashing in 2006? There's different
Mr.
standards.
Wandell, you can answer that as someone
Yeah.
who owned an older model plane. What
So
are the
the
standards?
airplane I owned was built in 1969.
Okay.
And it has to be maintained to the standards the minute of the inspection. So whatever, there's things that come out that are, they're called bulletins and, notices to airmen. And there are things that get done every year. So like Ryan just got hit with one where they discovered a stress fracture in the beams of certain airplanes called Pipers.
Oh, God.
And so now to be considered standard and pass, his airplane now is required every 5 years to have a sonogram done of his wing strut support system to look for microcracking. And so as things happen, new standards get put on, and you must bring your airplane to those standards. So a plane from I'm just going to use extremes, 1961, if it's flying today, it has to fly by today's right now standard.
By 2026 standards.
Right. So everything on the airplane has to be up to that. And we have hours. Like engines have to be completely overhauled. I just had to do that on my airplane. It cost me $40,000. So like the airplane, you can only fly it for 2,000 hours before you got to yank it out and rebuild the whole thing. So
are the materials and everything used back then still are they, how different are they?
Not a lot. So
okay.
In the general aviation world, if I were to buy a brand new engine for my airplane, it would be exactly the same built as it was in 1939. The technology for general aviation engines has changed very little because they are so reliable, and you don't mess with it. Like they're perfect. It's hard to think something so simple is so perfect, but they are. They're over-engineered to the extreme. So there's 2 spark plugs. There's 2 of everything for each piston. So it'd be like, if you have a V8 in a car, you have 8 spark plugs. Not in an airplane, you have 16 spark plugs.
Right.
You also have 2 sources of electricity that's providing electricity to those, which, by the way, don't need electricity of their own to make electricity. They're called magnetos. All of those things have to be serviced after these very short life periods to maintain the highest standard of performance possible.
Right.
So one little out of spec grounds your airplane.
Right. And so we're saying on a plane that made it from 1969 to 2026, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Most of these did not. What were the materials used in the planes that crashed? Were they the same standard in 2026? That's my question.
Well,
were the materials the same, the manufacturing the same? What kind of things were they using? Would they match up to today's building standard? I understand the technology manufacturing.
Well, the TriStar at the time was the most up-to-date current.
That was a brand new airplane.
That plane was
very
airplane,
brand new.
And it was having a lot of success. The DC-10s were kind of a newer airplane. Mm-hmm. Now, they had problems with their aft door. I think aft, is that what it's called? The aft cargo door coming open. Well, they grounded them and they made them fix that. The engine falling off the plane was not McDonnell Douglas' fault. Nope, they had very specific standards on how to do it. And here's the thing that I found, that once the aviation industry finds a way to do it cheaper, better, faster, they kind of all adopt the practice. So it wasn't just American that was guilty of using this different kind of maintenance to save time, because it takes about 200 hours, is what I read, to service the engine on a DC-10. That's one of them. Mm-hmm. So to keep a plane grounded for 200 hours is a lot of money lost. So whenever they found this, kind of all of the carriers began doing this. It's just American was the one that had the crash.
Yep. And, it's incidents like these that will pass new standards. So as soon as that happened, the NTSB and the FAA passed a new standard notice that came out that says, requirement of serviceability. And it says this has to be done exactly this way. Any deviation will immediately ground your airplane. So, when things like this happen, the NTSB and the FAA take it extremely serious, and they don't mess around. So, even by today's standards, the engines on these jets are built really, really well. There's been performance standards that have been able to change, but like a very modern instance of this is the 787 MAX that just got grounded. That happened, I think it was last year or the year before last. A brand new airplane, never even went into service. In their test flights, they had problems with control takeover stall. So the computer in the aircraft would actually take over from the pilot and stall the aircraft. And what was happening is the way the engines were set with the wing, it was disrupting. And so the wings could flex and the wings could move to change their angle of attack. So like Shelly, when you're talking about being nose up and the air hitting it, that's called the angle of attack. So these wings could actually adjust themselves. But the engine was so fucking big, it got in the way and it caused a stall. And so they spent, I can't remember this astronomical numbers, like $40 billion to re-engineer this. And they spent like another $100 billion to refit this and to get the airplane into service. And so that plane never even made it off the ground before it got, flagged for that. So even a brand new aircraft can have problems that you can't figure out until they go into the testing phase. Or in this case, they almost went on the production. So like they were literally about to roll these bad boys out to American's fleet and get flying. And that would have been catastrophic had that happened. But these systems are in place to catch those things. So it's never a one-man system in aviation. It's always multiple people that have to sign up on multiple things. That's why there's two pilots. It's not because one gets sleepy, the other takes a nap. That never happens. There's always two pilots at all times flying that airplane. And it's always checks and cross checks. You'll hear, in fact, sometimes you'll hear them on the PA system, they cross check. Well, that's because the people in the front are checking the people in the back. The people in the back are checking the people in the front. The pilots are checking each other. And we're all agreeing that what you said is actually what you said, which is why that incident with the freaking runway blows my mind. That means both pilots said the wrong damn runway number, or they said the right one and went to the wrong one, and neither of them had the balls to go, you're wrong.
Because had they called it back to the air traffic controller, they should have corrected them.
Yep.
So,
I was sitting right seat in a flight where we were told to hold short, and the pilot in my left side started to roll, and I slammed on the brakes and said, he said, hold short. I'm taking this airplane. It's my airplane. And so I immediately cut him off. So like, you're done. It's my airplane.
Right.
You don't get to touch controls now. So like, and so one of the things we're also taught is the links in the chain. Once one chain link breaks, the flight's over. Like that's decision making. Something is not right. The flight's over. We're turning back or we're landing right away. So
that's like JetBlue. They just said that's why if a plane calls for an emergency landing, you get them on the ground. However, you need to get them on the ground because there is something that is not right. Whether it's a passenger, whether it's a medical emergency, whether it's someone like Captain Osmond, who.
So this is exactly kind of what I'm talking about with all of this. That can I label it as a cursed flight number? I don't think that I can, because just as y'all said, the Max 787, is that what you said?
Yep, 787.
Brand new plane, technology of the day, never made it off. Just like all of these other planes were the best technology of the day, the best made planes, because there was something wrong with this brand new plane. It never made it off the ground because of the stress or the tests and everything they did. I would need to see, before I can label it as, yep, that's just a cursed flight, I need to see way more data, in my opinion, of like a breakdown of probability of numbers of flight. How many times does flight 191 appear, or 191 appear in flight numbers based on tail numbers, based on the numbers,
the number sequencing, right? Gotcha. How many times?
Talking about what was the flight in 1963's components and materials made of versus something in 2006? What were the standards back then? We don't know if that plane would have been decommissioned. We don't know if it would have been just declared like can't fly this anymore. It doesn't hold up to the standard because
in 1963
it crashed.
The NTSB would have had all of that in their finding for that crash as well, because a lot of people don't know this either. Whenever there's a plane crash, the NTSB will gather every single piece of that airplane, and they will actually put that airplane back 100% together. So it's a big deal to get it back, because they are going to look for anything that could have caused that plane to crash. And when I say anything, they're x-raying all the parts, they're x-raying everything, they're checking every inch of wiring. They literally put back a crashed aircraft. You've never seen them do it. It's quite astonishing to see them do that. But they will find stuff in things that you would never believe that somebody could find after a plane crash, especially when all you see is a ball of fire go up. But regardless of the year, those planes would have been to the standard that was prescribed to them. So it's not like we're talking about a 1963 aircraft flying in 2006 that crashed. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a 1963 aircraft that had been airworthy and flying quite flawlessly, that DC-10, quite flawlessly for 20 years. So it had been in service for 20 years.
Here is what I'm saying. That's the issue that I'm having. We're comparing.
We're not really comparing.
So would you compare a Model T to a Ferrari?
No, I wouldn't. But what I'm saying, but there's not a pattern for Ferraris and Model Ts crashing. We're trying to label something. But what I'm saying, hold on. I've been interrupted 13 times already.
Let's make it 19.
Trying to get this point across, damn it. What I'm saying is that I would need to see a bit more of what 1963 to all this stuff. These planes crashed. Would they have held up to the standard as aviation progressed? I myself am not trying to compare a 2026 and a 1963 aircraft. What I'm saying is that we can't lump this in together and go, this number's cursed. This flight is cursed, because there's so much more to it that we need to look at, other than just these are interesting stories where things went crazily wrong and they all happen to have 191 in the tail number. But we don't have a lot of the other information, in my opinion, is what I'm saying. And so not only that, but latching onto that is the human element of this. Are there other tail numbers that are 3 digits, 4 digits, 5 digits that have crashed repeatedly, that have gone unnoticed? What about all the different missing planes? What about all of this stuff? Is it just 191 that's made headlines several times, and so therefore it's the biggest stories, the one we hear most about? Therefore, we know more about them. Therefore, it's become a cursed number. I think that there needs to be a little bit more. I'm not going to label it as a cursed flight. I don't think it's a curse. I don't think it's cursed. If you want to talk numerology 191 that way, about craziness and linking up with that stuff, like you were saying towards the end of that, of 9/11 and all of those numbers and 911 and everything like that, I could get on board with that. But saying that the flight is cursed, I can't say it's a cursed flight.
Okay, so very quickly, let's go ahead and let's.
Sorry, I was trying to make a point.
Hang on, okay. We got you. So, I want your final thoughts, gentlemen, and I want you to tell me, last minute flight, you're assigned flight number 191. Are you getting on? Chad Wandell, go. Your final thoughts.
So my final thoughts are, first, to answer your question, no, I will not get on a 191 flight. To wrap everything I've set up in a nice little bow, many of you may not know what I actually do for a living. I am not a professional pilot for a living. I am a data scientist. And I work for an insurance company, and part of my job is what's called an actuary, which means I define risk. And I tell them that's a bad risk to take. Well, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines all did the same thing with the number crunching. If you think it's because they crashed, it's not. It's because the number of crashes started to define a risk they were no longer willing to take. Just saying. And the money talks.
That's right. Blake?
Not a cursed flight. I'll go down the rabbit hole of numerology and numbers and stuff like that in a grander scheme of things. Not a cursed flight, in my opinion. Would I get on the flight? No, because I don't fucking fly. I drive anytime that I possibly can. The only time I will fly is if I go overseas. And if I'm going overseas and the flight is 191, then yes, I will board it.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, my final thought is,
Where's the damn popcorn?
Much love, brother.
They're in the comments. Popcorn emojis all in the comments right now.
Bring it, peeps.
Much love, brother. I'll pray for you, because I'm going to tell you right now, there is no way in hell I'm getting on a flight numbered 191. I think the odds of this number having something supernatural, numerology-wise, something to do with the combination and series of this number mirrored 191. End, you have the beginning, you have the end, and a new beginning. I'm not risking it. I think that these planes at the time, they all were to their standards. I think that a lot of them were things that happened out of control, but I cannot deny that the fact that the things that happened, all different aircrafts, all different times, all different pilots, same flight number. So in that case, I am going to call it a curse. I think 191 is a cursed flight number, and you ain't going to see my ass on that plane. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right, sounds good. Well, if you want to support the show
Oh.
directly, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you are going to unlock over 500 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, because the post broadcast is bound to be lit tonight, which are the 30 minutes
no
before
mercy.
and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. So you are getting an additional hour with us each week. Your support from this goes directly back to the show and towards the adventures that we bring you week after week. And if you're not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Also, while you're there under recommended pages, go and check out the Oak Park Hotel's Patreon page, where they have 24/7, 365 live feeds inside. I'm going to claim it as Texas's most haunted hotel that I have been to.
Yeah.
So go and check out their page as well. Follow them on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Ghost Geeks. Search on all social media channels for those two, the Old Park Hotel and Ghost Geeks. And you can find all the adventures that Mr. Chad Wandell goes on as well. Make sure you stay connected with us too. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal, looking for the green sound wave. And remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. Also, check out our Eventbrite page for events. We have 2 on sale right now. Several on sale, but 2 locations. We have a couple more events at the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas. 2-night investigations. You get an entire weekend at that haunted hotel, and it is wonderful.
And a new location.
And a secondary location as well. We will be taking our group in July too. So if you bought tickets to July event, we will be going to a secondary location over the weekend as well. We also have 4 different chances over 1 weekend to investigate with us at Broadhead Manor in Broadhead, Wisconsin. So go check that out as well. To make all of it easier, we have added all these to our link tree, which is going to be the Everything Vaguely Paranormal Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, as well as in all of our show notes for you audio listeners. We are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with friends. And one of the easiest things you can do to help out our show and its rankings, wherever you get your audio from, head over there and simply download our catalog of episodes and leave us a review. If you have a story, comment, or question where you'd like to be a guest on the show, or have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Say hello. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you were here. And if you are coming over to Patreon and you are a Patreon member, you're going to want to make sure that you watch, because you see what I have planned for the gentlemen on tonight's Patreon. I may have dabbled into their numerology charts, and they may have one, and I may be telling them what their personality is and what's wrong with them. So, for myself, I am
certified.
My partner on the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith, and our wonderful guest host, Mr. Chad Wandell. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.